west because it was headed south at that point. So now it's heading not southeast but southwest, which nobody knows why that happened. On the cockpit voice recorder, you can hear the captain remarking about it, to which the navigator says VOR.
So, and it's significant, right, that it's a Soviet crew at this point?
It is.
So presumably it's not a crew that's used to making this run? This seems like a sort of run that might
That would be
been...
incorrect. This crew had been making this run. They had been flying in and out of this airport quite a few times. It wasn't like it was their first time.
Okay, that's weird.
Yeah, it's
It
strange.
seems like you would kind of be used to it.
Yeah. Now, granted, today we're a little spoiled because everybody uses GPS and it's so much more precise. But you know, they were like, "Oh, the instrument says go that way, and
That's a pretty big bank to make, though.
That is,
It is.
It's a pretty big course correct.
Yeah, and essentially they would have had to believe they were like, way, way far off course
Really
to
far.
the east.
Yeah.
They would have had to be heading out into the ocean
Yeah.
by accident.
Yeah.
Well, and they would have, I'm sure that they would have been used to seeing certain landmarks.
And that
and
is
geographic stuff, right?
That is
and so
very true.
Right. So even if the navigator is like, well, it says to go that way, you would think the pilot would be like, but those are the mountains that should be there. Like, what are you
I don't think there was
doing?
enough light. It was dark, right?
Yeah, it was dark. See, that's the thing. As you guys had said, there was no moon yet. And when they were flying, there was navigational aids. They weren't seeing things that they were expecting to be seeing, like certain lights or certain radio signals should have been coming in. They should have been picking up certain things, and they weren't.
And were they were commenting on that?
They were, and they believed that the power was out in the city. So they figured that, the electricity must be out. I think it's
But they didn't
the
radio?
captain says something like, it's running dark, chaps, or something like that.
It seems I guess it seems a little odd to me that they would have made radio contact with the tower and not been like, oh, hey, by the way.
So they do. Because when they hit the 3,000 feet mark, they get a hold of the air traffic control and they say, we're at 3,000 feet. And by the way, we can't see the runway lights. Can you check the runway lights?
Can you go flip that switch, huh?
Yeah, go double check that they're on. Look out the window, buddy. And they actually asked that twice. So they asked them to check that twice. They're in their descent. They think that they're, within 1,000 feet of the ground at this point, and they're ready to land. So they've dropped their landing gear, or lowered the landing gear, I should say.
They weren't within 1,000 feet of the ground at that time, were they?
Well, they thought they were, if I remember.
I think that the tower told them to descend to 3,000 feet and stay at 3,000. Right?
And they had, and the problem was they had continued to descend, presuming that they were on target and that in another 1,000 feet or so they'd be on the ground. The problem is, of course, they didn't stop at 3,000 feet, even though nobody confirmed that, they kept saying, I don't know what's going on here. So they're about 20 miles or 12 miles out or 20 kilometers out at this point. And then the ground proximity warnings start going off, which is the warning that says, hey, the ground is right under you, pull
But
up.
how far right under you?
A couple hundred feet.
Okay, so like right
under you, because I think the ground warning...
you're going to hit that house.
Yeah, they went off, and they actually descended another 200 feet, I think it was. They kept going down. And that's another thing that nobody can really pin as to why they did that. They kept going down, even though the alarm's going off. I mean, the crew is swearing. They can't figure out what's going on. They're not happy.
I believe they thought the ground proximity alarm was just defective. And
They decided that, apparently, and they kept talking to the air traffic control for another 22 seconds.
Yeah, I guess, if your ground proximity thing is going off, right, you would assume that either you're seeing lights from the ground because you're pretty dang close to the ground, or your sensor's faulty and you're where you think you are.
And you believe that you're in the spot that you have been in 100 times so far, so this part is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem is that it turned out the ground proximity warning was right.
Was not wrong.
It was not wrong. As I said, they had the wheels down. The plane continued to descend. So, it goes off. 22 seconds later, the plane crashes.
Yeah, into a hillside.
Into a hillside. So, as I understand it, what happened is the wheels and the belly of the craft hit the top of one of the hills in the area that it was in. It bounced off of that hill into the next hill. Didn't go nose first in, but, went into it, at which point one of the wings hit a tree and it starts tumbling. There was a total of 44 people on this plane. 9 of them survived. So 34 of them, or
33.
34, including Samora Michelle, it was 34 deaths.
Not if there were 44 people and 9 survived. 30.
Oh no, okay. So here's the weird thing about the numbers. Thank you for pointing that out, because I remember reading this and then it caught me.
Math isn't my thing, but I know that math.
One of the people that survived the crash initially died from the injuries 2 months later.
Okay.
So that's why that's what's screwing me up.
Okay.
So there's where I did my math.
So 10...
9 people survived
forever
initially, but then one of them died 2 months later after that. So technically 8 survivors.
Okay.
Fun way to spend the last 2 months of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, not awesome.
Yeah.
But one of the people that was on there that we talked about was Samora Michelle's wife, Gracia Michelle, and you might recognize her name because she would later go on, many years later, about a decade or more later, she married Nelson Mandela. So she was his wife. It puts her in one of those really unique categories as being the first lady of 2 different nations.
Yeah.
Which is something that, obviously she's the first. It's never really happened before.
She was Nelson Mandela's second wife.
Correct. It was her second marriage and his second marriage.
Which is fine.
Yeah. I think it's pretty obvious at this point that the plane was not, in fact, over Maputo Airport.
That Maputo maybe was not suffering some kind of weird power loss.
Absolutely
and actually
correct.
They had banked into the forest.
Well, what had happened is because of that 37-degree turn, they ended up in the Lubombo Mountains, which is on the border of Mozambique, Swaziland, and South Africa.
Oh,
they just weren't expecting
Tri-corners.
Yeah, it's a weird little no man's land. It's about 35 miles away from Maputo, which I guess would be 56 kilometers. So it's a weird hilly area, and the elevation is somewhere around 2,600 feet.
But it is where they would expect had they been on the correct course and then banked the way they did. That's where they would expect them to have been, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Based on the time and the speed of their travel, that is correct.
I just want to make sure that we're saying that, that made sense. The turn didn't make sense, but...
Yeah, the turn is one of the big mysteries, along with why they didn't stop descending.
Seems like with planes, the turn is often a weird mystery.
A wrong turn can spell disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I think it's also going to be pretty obvious here that, because they've been communicating with air traffic control, when they suddenly stopped communicating and then didn't say anything again to Maputo, that they launched a huge search and rescue operation.
Because they knew their president was on that plane.
Absolutely correct. The plane went down just after 9 o'clock at night, but because of where it crashed in that weird little no man's land, that little tri-corner as you called it, it wasn't until about midnight that the first South African police officers arrived at the crash scene.
Okay, so you keep saying just after 9 p.m.
I think it was like 9:20, 9:30-ish.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to be clear.
Actually, no, wait a second. If they made the turn at... Yeah, I guess it would be around 9:20, 9:30 is when their last communications were.
Yeah. Okay.
Ballpark.
Okay. Because for me, a little after 9 is not 9:20,
okay.
9:30.
No, and I will accept that.
Okay.
So the plane goes down. It's not till after midnight that the first South African police officers get there.
2.5 hours?
Yeah, several hours. And that's because, obviously it's not a highly populated area. It's not as if cell phones are ubiquitous. It's, you got to do things by driving to places
to get
to
have
a phone.
Find people.
Yeah. Well, there
were people living nearby, though.
There was a village right nearby.
Right, but the village had to then contact, and then somebody had to come out.
Right.
And they had to be like, wow, there was a big explosion there, and then somebody had to take them seriously. And
So they get there about midnight. About an hour later, the first medics arrive, and it's not until 3:45 a.m. that a medical chopper actually arrives to transport the survivors to the hospital. So these poor people have been on the ground, literally, for about 6 hours. So that didn't help the mortality rate among the crash victims.
yeah.
Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, during that time, what were the South Africans doing? The police, what were they doing? And the answer would be they were collecting paperwork.
Were they not also administering first aid?
Okay,
Like,
yes, I'm
let's
not
be
being
fair.
fair. I'm not being fair.
They were assessing the crash,
We're doing what they could,
pulling people out of the wreckage.
but at the same time, they were running around, picking up every single piece of paper that was floating around. They were opening luggage to find any and everything of import that they then were carting away to copy.
Yeah.
Because this is an intelligence bonanza at this
Probably,
point.
yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that they find and they seize is the cockpit voice recorder. They seize it under the auspice of fear that it can be tampered with, which is the weirdest reasoning I've ever heard of.
I mean, it technically is their jurisdiction.
But the South Africans did a lot of weird stuff.
Oh, I'm sure.
During this
But I'm
whole
just saying
thing.
that, like, weird or not, we can say it's like super nefarious that they seize this thing, but it's their jurisdiction.
It is.
Of course, they're gonna take it.
You're right.
Well, it's also, besides which, I mean, did they seize it or did they just secure it?
Oh no, they
Put
took it.
safe? Yeah, I know.
they took it.
Well, I know they took it, but I mean, it seems like you should take it and put it somewhere.
Right.
And not just leave
Seizing
it
to
there.
me
People
is
who,
like
the
if-
guy who took it wouldn't give it back.
It did take a while to get it back to
Yeah.
him. Yeah.
He had to do it under threat of legal action. Like
Yeah.
it's really hokey what
Okay.
happened here. But
Yeah.
if we move forward in time, I think it's around 6 a.m., but maybe a little before that, the South African Minister of Foreign Affairs, Pik Botha, arrives. And they also, by the way, about this time or shortly thereafter, let a South African news crew on the site. And Pik Botha begins to talk to the camera crew, and he starts making really strange statements, which in retrospect, everybody has said were diversionary tactics, but they were still really weird because he starts saying things like, well, obviously the flight crew was drunk on vodka because they were Russian, or obviously the plane was old and poorly kept, which didn't actually turn out to be true.
I'm gonna say something here. But
Yeah?
are you sure he wasn't just racist?
I'm not going to respond to that because I don't know.
Because this
well,
like this 100% sounds like somebody being like, well, oh, they were Russians? Oh, well, they were drunk on vodka and like doing Mother Russia the favor. Like that's what that sounds like
I
to me.
know exactly where you're going. I had the same thought myself.
It could have, it's not racist though necessarily because the Ruskies are white.
If
It's racism.
Okay, we're just going to leave that alone.
Yeah.
He also said that obviously the meeting that Samora Machel had been at was meant to set up a plot to overthrow the government of Malawi. And then he also made statements about how Samora Machel were both his and President Botha's dear friends. By the way, there might be a bit of confusion there. Pik Botha was the foreign affairs minister. There was also the president at the time, who was of no relation of South Africa,
But-
also had the last name of
Like
Botha.
maybe like Smith or Jones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sort of. It was just a weird little thing there. But like I said, none of his claims were true, and nobody could ever pin down why he was doing it, because he did it for like a year. At the same time, the bodies of everybody who died in the crash, they're collected, and autopsies would eventually be done on 4 members, or actually a total of 7 people, 4 of whom were members of the flight crew, and then 3 others who were passengers on the plane. But there's that 7, and then there's also another group of 6 bodies that were not autopsied, that when they were returned to the Mozambican government, had these weird 7 millimeter long cuts on their necks that were stitched closed. And they were done post-mortem, and it's believed that was done to collect blood samples, but it's the weirdest way to collect blood samples, since I don't know, needles are a thing.
There's
But
that
maybe this
possibility.
is a field method to do it. I don't know.
Were they right over like the carotid artery where that's at?
I believe so, yes.
And they were post-mortem.
Post-mortem. They were also proven, according to the Mozambique Medical Commission, they weren't the cause of death for these people. So it's not as if somebody cut their throats
Yeah.
open and stitched them closed to
Well,
keep them
but
quiet.
I guess for me, it's the weird part is stitching them back closed.
Is why for?
Yeah, like why?
Yeah.
You know, like if they're dead bodies and you're not trying to hide something.
Respect? I mean, that's the only thing I can come up with, is maybe it's out of respect to the dead.
Just tidy
But,
up
I mean,
that,
you're
yeah.
already like
Keep them
messing
from
with the
leaking
dead.
everywhere? I don't know.
Super glue, man.
Yeah.
You're laughing, but I mean, like that's
I know.
It's like
I
a-
know that's why it was invented. I know. Okay, so we had already talked about here a little bit the fact that there was a town nearby. That was the town of Bazzini.
I think it's just Muzzini.
Muzzini?
The way I've heard it pronounced, the B seems
yeah,
to be
see,
silent.
okay.
Yeah.
This is not my language, so I'm going to run with that. Is
Yeah.
Bazzini, and those people the people of that village did go to the site, but they also made claims about how when the soldiers arrived, they chased them away.
Well,
which I don't.
you got to secure the scene, right?
Yes, that's exactly my point. I don't find that bit weird.
That's not suspicious, no.
No. Okay. So, by the way, we should probably go back to Mozambique for a second because they're still looking for their president, and it's not till 10 to 7 in the morning that the South African government lets them know that they found the plane, and then they told them it was in a different spot,
okay.
like
The
200
different
kilometers
spot,
away.
The different spot thing, suspicious. The waiting realistically a couple hours. I mean, I don't know how fast word travels that, especially, right? We're talking like analog days.
The phone still is a thing. The
yeah,
telephone.
But I don't know. But I'm saying that, like, okay, so a plane goes missing, right? So your air controller is going to call your government and you're going to mobilize your military. You're not going to call every single branch of the police in all of the countries surrounding.
So I will rebut that a little bit, which is that their foreign ministers had gotten a hold of the South Africans to let
Okay.
them know.
Great.
So the South African government knows this.
But I guess
Pick Botha gets a call at
Pick Botha, okay.
4 or 5 in the morning saying, hey, we found this plane and it crashed and we're pretty sure the president of Mozambique is on it.
But we're assuming that the people who were contacted in the South African government were also like
South
letting,
Africans?
Well, that they were letting Pick Botha know.
Yes.
Right.
So at that point, they could have turned around and said, we think we found your plane,
Well,
but we're
I guess
unconfirmed.
I'm just saying that, like,
they
you're
didn't say anything.
You're attributing. I just think it could be bad communication.
It could be also that they just wanted to wait until people were up. Because at this point, plane's down, people are dead. Just let them sleep in for a few more hours. Maybe they were just being considerate.
So college dorm rules, okay.
Yeah. I think that is less likely than like bad communication, because like if they've been communicating, hey, we lost our president, they're already awake. Everyone
maybe.
knows they're awake, but
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's
I mean,
let's let that go for the time being.
Okay.
I am just assuming that they wanted a few extra hours just to, gather up more intel. And
I think
probably
that's
what it was.
I think
Yeah,
that's what it
probably.
is. They were busy photocopying and photographing everything they could get their hands
and
on.
making
yeah.
weird cuts into bodies.
Right.
Well, that didn't happen until later.
An investigation is launched into this crash. This is based on the Chicago Convention, which was agreed to by the countries in that area several years prior. The crash was investigated jointly by the countries of South Africa, because that's where the plane had crashed, by the country of Mozambique, because it was their plane, and by the Soviet Union, because they were the manufacturer of the plane. So we've got 3 organizations involved in this joint investigation, but it didn't last very long because both the Mozambican and the Soviet delegations pulled out because they felt like the South Africans just weren't involving them. They were cutting them short on things. They weren't giving them all the information. So in the end, it ended up being a South African investigation. It was headed up by Judge Cecil Margot, and is commonly referred to as the Margot Commission. And that name might sound a little familiar to anybody who's listening to this podcast, because if you remember the 1987 crash of South African Airlines Flight 295, We covered that a while back.
Yeah.
The Margot Commission also investigated that crash.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's another weird connection, and the longer we do this, the more connections between every story. Oh my God, they're all connected.
It's the octopus.
I was just gonna say it's the octopus.
Yeah.
Getting slow.
Oh man.
On that
You're not
bank.
as young and quick as you once were, whippersnapper. Alrighty. So moving
so they
on.
concluded that it was swamp gas, right?
They did not, because there was a swamp nearby. No, the Margot Commission actually concluded that the whole thing was caused by crew error.
Quite possible.
They said that the crew was negligent in their duties, which is why they made both the turn and why they didn't follow the procedure when the ground proximity warnings went off. Basically, they're saying there was no reason for them to turn. That was a bad move, and they should have stopped descending or pulled up when the warnings went off.
I think I would have.
Well, I would have too.
This might be where Russian technology quality control comes into play because they might have thought, it's just not working right, because
the crew itself.
no, the ground proximity alarm.
Well, the crew themselves thinking
They thought
that about the
They were
warning.
thinking that because
They're
that thing,
thinking the faulty part.
yeah, I mean, if that thing is going off, the only reason you're not going to pull up, unless you're drunk on vodka, of course, the only reason you're not going to pull up is if you think it's just defective.
Yeah.
I guess. I'll wait until theories.
Yeah, because you know what the thing is that it's funny you say that because there is some stuff in the commission, but the Soviets themselves, they were not happy with the results of the Margot Commission, and they submitted a minority report of their own, and that is where they put forward the idea that the plane was actually led off course intentionally by a decoy VOR. So that signal we talked about before, somebody spoofed it and led them astray. That really didn't get a lot of traction at that time, but 15 years later, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was opened.
What a great name.
Yeah, and so the TRC was set up after the apartheid government fell apart, and from the way I understand it, what it did is it looked into situations where human rights violations were made with no care by the South African government, and they would help do what they could to either document it or possibly fix it, do what they could. Now, I don't know why they got involved in this case, short of the fact that Mandela's now wife was involved